Lo Spirito Santo ancora oggi suscita negli anziani.
The Holy Spirit still stirs up thoughts and words of wisdom in the elderly today. Their voice is precious because it sings the praises of God and safeguards the roots of peoples. They remind us that old age is a gift and that grandfathers are the link between generations, passing on the experience of life and faith to the young.
Per trasmettere ai giovani l'esperienza di vita e di fede.
About 1 week before World Youth Day in Lisbon, the Catholic Church will celebrate World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly on July the 23rd. It is in the tradition of the Church to care for the elderly. The scriptures call for reverence and respect for the older generations. They have a high status, not only in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
We see it in so many different cultures. Just in my rare experiences in Africa, obviously the elders of tribes, of families, are very, very important, precisely for what the Pope says, for passing on their experience, their values. Not only what they learned that worked out, but the mistakes they make. You know, don't do this because it just won't work out in your favor. So that's a huge thing that can be passed on to young people, help them avoid the pitfalls.
The Church itself wants to set a good example. The last years of Pope John Paul II's life were marked by suffering. Seeing the Vicar of Christ represent his Lord, even in pain, moved people all over the world. Pope Francis is also not ashamed to show his physical weaknesses to the world. Perhaps because of that frailty, he feels a special mandate to advocate for the elderly. 2 years ago, he presented this idea.
I nonni tante volte sono dimenticati.
Grandparents are often forgotten, and we forget this wealth of preserving roots and passing on. This is why I have decided to establish World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly, which will be held throughout the Church every year on the 4th Sunday of July, close to the feast of Saints Joachim and Anne, Jesus' grandparents.
I nonni di Gesù.
This weekend marks the 3rd World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly. Its motto, His mercy is from age to age.
Pope Francis noted that this year, actually as in most years, he says, the World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly takes place close to World Youth Day. In this way, we look at the bond that unites the young and old, said the Pope. The Lord trusts that young people, through their relationships with the elderly, will realize that they are called to cultivate memory.
In 2020, the Vatican organized an international congress specifically focused on the elderly, titled The Richness of Many Years of Life.
We have to find a vocation for the elderly. And I think that when you talk about vocation, you talk about the future. Prayer is something that we can learn from the elderly. But every Christian is called to pray. And gratuitousness and relationship. I mean, the time of life, the old age, is a time of life when relationship is everything. So let's become friends of the elderly, and we will understand how to overcome our lonely society.
Innanzitutto, crea comunità con gli anziani.
First, create community with the elderly, because one of the greatest problems of older people today is loneliness and the lack of an end of life and a purpose in life. Then, give these elderly a community. Don't let them be alone and give them a chance to help others who need it most. First of all, in prayer.
Pope Francis, however, is concerned not only about helping the elderly, but also about preserving their dignity.
Nowadays, in secularized societies in many countries, parents do not have, for the most part, the Christian formation and living faith that the grandparents have, which they can pass on to their grandchildren. They are the indispensable link in educating children and young people in the faith. They are not only people whom we are called to safeguard, they can be the protagonists of a pastoral evangelizing ministry, privileged witnesses of God's faithful love.
In his message for World Day of Grandparents and the Elderly 2023, Pope Francis calls on young people to visit their grandparents or an elderly person as part of their preparation for World Youth Day. At the same time, the Holy Father addresses a request directly to the elderly, saying, "Those young people are God's answer to your prayers, the fruits of all that you have sown, the sign that God does not abandon his people, but always rejuvenates them with the creativity of the Holy Spirit." In Rome, Rudolf Gehrig, EWTN News in Depth.